afraid of the dark.
Hello, my subscribers and guests who haven't done this yet. Without further ado, let's begin today's creepy story. Sit back, make some tea or coffee, and we'll get started. Oksana loved winter with all its bright charm, the first snow, tangerines, and the anticipation of holidays. But when the dull and gloomy February came with its fogs, rains, frosts, and snowstorms, her mood became more dreamy and slightly melancholy. Oksana was raised by her grandmother, a lively and energetic woman. The grandmother was a ballet teacher and lived in a large apartment with her own mother. Oksana moved in with her when she was already over 10 years old and spent most of her time in a large old armchair in the dim light of the room, dozing or dreaming in a borderline state between sleep and wakefulness. In moments of clarity, she recalled her childhood incoherent stories and fragmented memories that she eagerly awaited, like a magical tale. "Do you remember the Cooter's small rural settlements?" her grandmother would say. "That's where our family used to live." Oksana listened breathlessly to the stories about their hospitable family, the delicious pies baked by her mother and her assistant, the long conversations by the fireplace on winter evenings, and how her father used to take the children with him to the forest to cut down a Christmas tree. These memories always featured winter, as if this season was particularly rich in events that left a lasting impression. The grandmother spoke slowly, in a quiet voice, often pausing as if gathering strength. "You shouldn't keep the Christmas tree for too long," she would say. "It needs to be taken down by the Krishensky Sochin Epiphany Eve. Otherwise," she suddenly cried out, "you'll end up like Verochka, a lost soul. She brought ruin upon herself because of her foolishness." Oksana froze, frightened by the thought that her family had some dark secret. This thought both disturbed and fascinated her. The grandmother would come in, hearing the noise, bringing tea with mint drops in a small glass, and scold Oksana for pestering her with questions again. Much later, when Oksana grew up, the grandmother told her about her older sister, Vera. She became strange after one incident, the grandmother explained. She performed a fortune-telling ritual on Epiphany Eve, the most dangerous time for such things. We never found out what happened to her. Vera was unconscious when her family found her. Maybe she was scared of something, maybe she hit her head when she fell. The once cheerful and mischievous Vera became quiet and withdrawn, locking herself in her room, and then she ran away from home. They searched for her in vain. What happened to the rest of the family? Where are the children of her brothers and sisters, their grandchildren, now? It was a turbulent time, war, revolution. The family was scattered, some perished, some disappeared without a trace. If anyone survived, it was pointless to look for them now they had become strangers. Oksana never cared about the fate of her own mother, who left her at the age of 8 and never reappeared in her life. The girl was happy with her grandmother, in a world of fantasies and dreams that she created for herself. In this imaginary world, she had a large family, just like her grandmother, many brothers and sisters to play with, share secrets, and simply be together. Her peers considered Oksana odd, and she had no friends from childhood. She was always different from others, quiet, introverted, and introspective. As she grew up, she developed a love for long dresses, knitted sweaters, and unusual hats that she found in her grandmother's closets. Her grandmother approved of her fondness for vintage clothing, saying that a woman should have her own unique charm that reflects both her style and behavior. Tall and slender, with glasses and a thick braid, Oksana doubted that she possessed this mysterious quality. She lacked self-admiration and considered herself ordinary, avoiding mirrors. Perhaps it was because of the old incident with her great-aunt Vera, or maybe for other reasons, but they didn't decorate a Christmas tree in their house, and Oksana was indifferent to the New Year celebrations at school and the gifts. However, there was one special day in their family that they honored according to tradition. In February, on the last day of Maslenitsa Butter Week, they performed a unique ritual. The grandmother crafted a simple doll from old rags, and in the evening they solemnly burned it on the balcony in an old bucket, reciting magical words. The magical power of fire destroys the charms of winter and evil, drives away otherworldly forces, and brings new life, the grandmother explained. And so another year has passed. At the end of the ritual, they waved a great cloud of ash in the air, saying, "Let the new year roll on without stumbling." They never burned the last doll, they didn't have time. Oksana carried it with her as a memento of her grandmother, as a talisman, along with a half-empty matchbox featuring a dancing ballerina. Throughout the year, she didn't get around to cleaning out the clutter that had accumulated in the room occupied by her grandmother and great-grandmother. Her grandmother never threw anything away, and over time, the closets, attics, and drawers of the writing desk became archaeological deposits, unused medications, glass bottles with remnants of perfumes, old calendars, and reproductions of paintings on the walls, all covered in a thick layer of dust. Large antique vases held wilted bouquets of dried flowers. It became Oksana's habit to spend her evenings in that room, in the very armchair that her grandmother had favored in her later years. Wrapped in a blanket, Oksana would read or look through old photographs. There was one particular photo that she loved to examine, a faded, blurry image of a young woman sitting on a chair with her back turned to the photographer. The photograph turned out to be a failure. The model's face was overexposed, and on the back, there was a faded inscription that read, "Vera, this distant secret of their family," still intrigued Oksana's imagination. However, it wasn't this curiosity but loneliness that prompted the young woman to search for her relatives. She registered on several specialized websites, sent letters and inquiries to archives, not really hoping for a response, and waited. So when she finally received a letter from a possible relative inviting her to visit, Oksana didn't hesitate to take a leave and travel to a distant southern settlement. The massive house suddenly loomed over Oksana from behind the dense bushes in the twilight. It seemed like a ghost or a phantom to the girl, and only when she approached closer did she notice the rough gray stones that made up the walls and the blood-red window frames, like stigmata on the body of the house. A narrow path, winding through the thickly overgrown bushes, led to the entrance. Oksana stood on the porch, hesitating. For a moment she was overwhelmed by a distressing feeling, as if she had made a mistake by coming here. She rang the doorbell once, twice, and then knocked gently. "Are you Oksana?" The unexpected voice startled her, and she silently watched the woman who appeared from behind the corner of the house, standing not far from her. How had she not noticed those two crudely crafted wooden figures, about the size of a small dog, standing on four legs, one blue and the other pink? Their short necks were topped with flat wooden heads painted with primitivist-style human faces. The blue one had a man's face with a sparse beard and drooping ears, while the pink one had a woman's face with rouged cheeks and a red mouth twisted in a smirk. Their narrow eyes were squinted, staring at Oksana with hidden malice. They seemed alive, as if they were about to pounce. "Don't be afraid of these scoundrels," the woman said, bending down to stroke the creature's hard wooden bodies as she passed by. "They are my cats. Aren't they lovely?" Oksana wasn't sure if the woman was joking. These grotesque creations would have looked like a parody of real cats if it weren't for the sinister aura they exuded. "You?" Oksana asked, unsure how to address the woman. "Vera Naumovna," the woman introduced herself. "I've been expecting you. Please come in." Inside the house, Oksana relaxed a little and looked around. A wide wooden staircase led from the small hallway to the second floor, and through an arched opening, she could see a large, spacious room. Antiques were everywhere in the furnishings, paintings, and even in the very atmosphere of the house. However, a laptop with a bitten apple on its lid seemed out of place among these vintage items. Oksana felt as if she had stepped into someone's old estate, where time had stood still long ago. And indeed, it seemed that the woman living here cherished and valued the past. Oksana instantly felt a sense of sympathy for her, as she herself shared this appreciation for the past. "My dear, come here by the window," Vera Naumovna said gently, leading Oksana to the window and smiling. "It's a pleasure to meet a young lady who appreciates the charm of vintage things and the art of dressing up. Nowadays, it's a rare quality." The 30-year-old Oksana felt awkward, both from the unexpected sugary address and the bluntness of her presumed relative. The initial sympathy she had felt vanished. What had she expected, after all? That she would instantly feel a bond, a call of blood. But the woman standing in front of her was a stranger, and her cold, Assessing gaze and false intonation disturbed Oksana. Her feeling of awkwardness intensified. Trying to dispel it, Oksana approached the wall covered with black and white photographs. According to the captions, they were taken a long time ago, in the 1950s and 1960s. There were also some very old, pre-revolutionary photos. "Do you have any family photos?" Oksana asked. But Vera Naumovna ignored the question, gesturing dismissively at the hanging photographs. "Do you like these? I took them myself. There was a time when I was passionate about photography. I had many hobbies and traveled a lot, but in the end, I returned to where it all began." Vera Naumovna looked to be in her 60s, with a short gray hairdo, an elaborate painted cloak, and large rings on her fingers. She had a bright and stylish appearance, but this only emphasized her thinness and frailty. "Why is she lying to me?" Oksana thought. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came, dissolving in a wave of fatigue from the long journey, excitement, and the impact of the meeting. The girl's usual migraine began. Oksana's head was pounding so badly that she didn't have the energy left even for small talk. She absent-mindedly left her cosmetic bag with pills on the train, and Vera Naumovna offered her some of her own medicine. From a faceted, massive, dark glass bottle, she poured a small amount of a bitter-tasting liquid, supposedly for headaches. "I trust old-fashioned remedies prepared according to special recipes," said Vera Naumovna reassuringly as she escorted Oksana to her room. "You should lie down and rest after your journey. We can talk more tomorrow." Oksana barely listened and mechanically followed up the stairs, hoping the medicine would take effect soon. Oksana woke up in the middle of the night, hungry. Vera Naumovna had not shown any hospitality, not even offering her a cup of tea after her journey. Now, in this unfamiliar house, Oksana regretted coming here on a whim. She desperately wanted to return to her own cozy life and her memories. Oksana couldn't quite figure out the impression Vera Naumovna had made on her. Strangely, they shared the same first name and patronymic as her older sister, although they were not related. Perhaps everything would become clearer in the detailed conversation they were going to have in the morning. The hunger pangs grew stronger. Oksana went downstairs and spotted a large fruit platter on the table. She decided to take an apple or an orange. The hallway was dark and quiet, so she used her phone's flashlight to guide her way. She felt awkward about wandering around like this, and a bit scared by the eerie silence that surrounded her. The pile of glossy, colorful fruits looked tempting, but to Oksana's disappointment, they turned out to be fake papier-mâché replicas. Assuming the next room to be the kitchen, Oksana entered, but instead of a stove and a refrigerator, she found only a few closed wooden cabinets on the walls and a table with 4 chairs by the window. Oksana cautiously opened one of the cabinets. It was empty. She checked the others as well, but they were all the same empty. Where were the food, dishes, and kettle? It was a mystery how Vera Naumovna managed to live here. A sudden sharp, rattling sound broke the silence, startling Oksana. She flinched, and the light from her phone zigzagged across the walls, illuminating 2 figures just a step away. Vera Naumovna's cats. Motionless like wooden statues, they stood there, their painted faces expressionless, but their postures exuded a sense of hidden determination and readiness to pounce. Oksana was shocked by their presence. Just a couple of minutes ago, there had been no one here. Where had they come from? They couldn't have come on their own, so someone must be playing a trick on her, or trying to scare her for wandering around the house. In their correspondence, Vera Naumovna had mentioned living alone. Could that be true? The flashlight beam darted around, but Oksana could see no one except for the 2 silent feline figures. The thought of having to pass by them filled her with as much dread as their unexplained appearance. Tense and transfixed by the cats, Oksana edged past them, and for a moment she imagined the figures slowly turning to follow her with their gaze. The desire to explore the house further vanished, and Oksana hurried back to her room, wanting to shut herself behind a door, at least temporarily shielding herself from the strange occurrences. She rushed, barely holding herself back from breaking into a run, afraid that someone might respond or touch her. Her phone's light was now very dim in the dark corridor, and Oksana was confused, unsure which of the 4 identical red doors led to her room. How could she have forgotten the location of her room? The headache yesterday had distracted her, but now her nearsightedness and absent-mindedness made her oblivious to many details, though she had never been this careless before. Oksana cautiously opened the first door and peered inside. It was dark and quiet. She hesitated to turn on her flashlight and stood there for a moment, straining to see in the darkness. Gradually, she made out a chair, a small table with a lamp, and an old-fashioned large bed. The room seemed to belong to Vera Naumovna. Without turning on the light, Oksana walked towards the bed and sat on its edge. The warmth of the feather bed enveloped her, but as she shifted, she froze, suddenly aware that she was not alone there with someone else in the bed. Had she accidentally walked into Vera Naumovna's room? Oksana jumped up and stammered an apology, but the figure on the bed didn't stir. Acting on impulse, Oksana turned on her flashlight and saw a young woman sleeping peacefully, her long hair spread across the pillow. Oksana quickly retreated, hoping the room's occupant wouldn't wake up. The hallway remained dark and quiet. Oksana tried to calm herself, but fear continued to grip her, intensified by the absurdity of the situation she found herself in. She hurried to the next door and cautiously opened it. There, in a chair almost directly across from the door, sat Vera Naumovna, staring straight ahead, seemingly unaware of Oksana's presence. Oksana waved her trembling hand in front of Vera's face, but there was no reaction. Vera sat motionless, giving no sign of life. Unsure what to do, Oksana touched the woman's hand and was relieved to feel a pulse. But the next moment she felt a painful nudge on her legs, causing her to lose balance and fall onto Vera Naumovna. As she felt the woman's limp body yield beneath her, her glasses slipped off and fell somewhere into the darkness. Overcome with terror, Oksana screamed, stumbled backward, and almost fell again, colliding with something solid. This time, Vera's cats appeared silently, and Oksana was certain they had pushed her. Or perhaps it was the person who had brought them here, who was now also lurking in the shadows, watching her. Oksana lost the last shreds of composure and rushed down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. It was a miracle she didn't tumble down the steps, as without her glasses she could barely see, and the faint beam of her flashlight revealed only fragments of her surrounding steps, walls, and the staircase railing. Oksana vaguely recalled that the staircase from the entryway led both upward and downward. In her panic, she missed a step and found herself in a short dead-end passage with a closed door. Her phone, now completely discharged, flickered and went dark. The darkness enveloped the girl, seeping into every cell of her body. In this pitch blackness, just a few steps away, lurked monstrous cats, or perhaps something even more terrifying. Oksana had never felt such overwhelming helplessness. The fear clenched her chest, threatening to burst out at any moment and tear her apart. She reached out and touched the wall. The cold, rough surface brought her back to reality. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying desperately to calm down and shake off the dreadful sensation of blindness. And just then, at the foot of the stairs, a faint, pale light appeared, only a few steps away from Oksana. Someone was standing there. Without her glasses, she could make out only a blurry, dark silhouette. Vera Naumovna, she wondered. Oksana moved towards the figure, trying to explain her actions and justify her presence downstairs. But it was only when she drew closer that she realized it wasn't the hostess but the stranger they had met the day before. The stranger held a candle, and the flickering light cast eerie shadows on her face. Oksana stammered, I must have woken you. I was just looking for my room. I'm sorry." The stranger remained silent, and Oksana, mumbling apologies, slipped past her and started climbing the stairs. Her nerves were stretched to the breaking point, but she forced herself to move slowly, feeling her way up the steps. She commanded herself not to look back. On the second floor, the silence persisted. This time, luck was on Oksana's side. She found her room immediately. She nearly tripped over her bag, which she had left by the entrance, and put on her spare glasses. The fear didn't subside, but now, with a clear view, the room felt more familiar, and her confidence returned. "I need to get out of this sinister house right now, without waiting for morning," Oksana decided. The night, the cold, the wind, the long journey to the nearest settlement, none of it seemed as frightening as what I've experienced here. Filled with determination, Oksana picked up her bag, but the sounds coming from the corridor made her freeze. First, she heard the familiar wooden tapping, followed by a rustling noise, as if someone was sneaking down the hallway. Oksana's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the doorknob turn slowly and cautiously. She sprang into action, dragging chairs nearby and propping them against the door. Now the silence wasn't comforting. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to escape these unwanted, terrifying visitors. Oksana panicked, pacing the room, and it took her a moment to realize that no one was trying to enter anymore. The doorknob stopped turning, and silence returned. Leaving the room was out of the question for now. She would have to wait for morning. As for what would happen next, it was better not to think about it. Oksana spent the rest of the night trembling in the chair, dozing off only briefly. When she woke up, she started as if to run, unsure if what she had experienced was a dream or reality. The pale morning light filled the room. The wind outside rustled the trees and tossed snow against the windows. Could all that have really happened? It was hard to believe now. The events of the night seemed like a distant, surreal pile of madness, akin to the fantastical adventures of Alice from her beloved childhood book. As Oksana tried to make sense of what had transpired, she recalled Vera Naumovna giving her those unknown drops. Perhaps they had induced such intense hallucinations or caused some kind of side effect. Either way, Oksana had no intention of staying in the house any longer. Moving as quietly as possible, she pushed the chair aside and stood there for a moment, listening intently. Then, with her bag in hand, she cautiously made her way towards the stairs. The door to the first room was ajar. There, by the window, stood a woman in a long, old-fashioned dress, her hair styled in an elegant coiffure. It was the same stranger that Oksana encountered downstairs at night, whose behavior seemed so strange. So, Vera Naumovna does live alone after all. Instead of passing by, Oksana addressed the stranger, "Good morning. I haven't seen the owner yet." But the stranger ignored the girl's greeting, not turning at her voice. It seemed important to Oksana to talk to the stranger, to explain herself. She entered the room and approached the woman, who continued to stare out the window at the dance of snow and wind. There was something wrong, unnatural about her, and upon closer inspection, Oksana gasped. Before her stood a doll. The doll reminded Oksana of someone, but she couldn't understand who. The girl wasn't a beauty, but there was an attractiveness about her, the freshness of youth, a thoughtful gaze, the puffiness of tightly pressed lips. All of it was impeccably portrayed. It seemed she would sigh any moment, turn her head, and ask Oksana, "How did you end up here?" Vera Naumovna's voice, suddenly sounding from behind, had the effect of thunder. The hostess entered silently. "I see you've already met Veronica. She's my companion. She brightens up my solitude." "Is this a doll?" Oksana muttered, feeling she needed to explain her presence in someone else's room, to apologize. Thoughts in her head tangled like frightened birds. Why would someone put a doll in bed? Could it be that Vera Naumovna plays with dolls like a little girl? And how did the doll end up downstairs at night? So the hostess deliberately staged it so crudely, so terrifyingly. What if the mysterious drops were to blame for everything? Oksana would look foolish if she brought it up. Questions overwhelmed Oksana, clamoring to be let out. To ask or not to ask? This is a reborn, an imitation of a living person, Vera Naumovna explained, as if reading her thoughts. "Did you recognize her? This is an exact copy of Vera, the older sister of your great-grandmother. I've never seen Vera. Only one photo of her is left in our small archive, and it's not very good, defective. I made this doll for myself. I have a small workshop downstairs in the basement. I create dolls for private collections based on special orders." "And did you make the cats too?" Oksana unexpectedly asked herself. "No, I didn't make them. Based on my sketches, they were made by a very talented craftsman. Where are they now? Did you bring them up?" Vera Naumovna raised an eyebrow. "I rarely leave them at home. They're too bulky. You see, they made an impression on you, but I saw them here in the house at night. Maybe they're wandering around on their own." "To be honest, I don't keep track of them," the hostess continued. "One of us clearly isn't themselves. Maybe it's me going crazy, like Veronica before. And what if some sort of mental illness runs in our family?" "Are you going somewhere?" Vera Naumovna looked pointedly at her bag. "I just want to go to the village. to a cafe or a store. "I'm very hungry," Oksana murmured. "You didn't find anything here?" "I'm sorry," Vera Naumovna was embarrassed. "I didn't think about that. Veronica and I manage without food." "Well, let's go. I'll show you my workshop, and then you'll leave. I hope you'll stay with me a little longer. We'll both need time to get used to each other." "Well, let's go. I can't wait to show off." And almost by force, she dragged Oksana downstairs to the familiar wooden door at the dead end of the basement floor. The room designated as the workshop was huge. Pale light seeping in from a narrow window near the ceiling faintly illuminated it. Along one wall stood a long table, cluttered with scraps, jars, boxes, molds, blanks, and various tools necessary for work. Oksana didn't even attempt to inspect anything closely. All her attention was immediately drawn to the human head lying right there. It was repulsive. The wrinkled eyelids were pressed into empty eye sockets. In the gap of the lipless mouth, yellow, sparse teeth were visible. "I'm redoing the head for this handsome man," Vera Naumovna gestured towards the figure, vaguely discernible under the light cover on the rocking chair. Only the legs with wrinkled skin, blue veins, and fashionable but cracked nails are visible. Oksana shuddered with disgust. She couldn't imagine what this doll's face would look like. Who even needed to commission such a monstrosity? "The work is almost done. I just need to finish the head and dress him," Vera Naumovna continued. "You see, the expression on the face determines not only the overall perception of the doll, but also its character, its inner essence. The previous one came out too kind-hearted." "Where are your other works?" Oksana asked, expecting to see many dolls. "My other works are with the customers. I never make several dolls simultaneously. It's difficult and troublesome. They're too lively." Vera Naumovna opened a cupboard. "Here I keep blanks, scraps, and other odds and ends for creating the image. And here is my main treasure, an invaluable thing that belongs to me." She pulled out a small chest from under the table. Wrapped in a dark velvet scrap, an old frameless mirror tile lay inside, with a dim, tarnished mercury. "But you have a mirror much prettier than this one," Oksana remarked, approaching the large human-sized one standing on the floor on massive wooden supports. Indifferently glancing at her reflection, she noted that her usual expression of bewildered embarrassment had reached its peak in the picture before her now. Something was missing. The woman standing next to her wasn't reflected in the mirror. "Yes, my girl, you don't see me in the mirror. That's because I have no reflection," Vera Naumovna, as if reading her thoughts, continued. "Sometimes I feel like I don't exist at all, and the mirror only confirms this, reflecting my emptiness. That's why I made a doll copy of Vera. I assigned her the role of my reflection. Thanks to Veronica, I entered the world of people. She loved herself so much that she spent hours in front of the mirror. I instilled thoughts of fortune-telling in her. Controlling her turned out to be very easy. I used her body and lived like a human, almost like a human. I have to avoid mirrors. I even get haircuts without them. It's one of my eccentric whims." "But that's terrifying," objected Oksana. "The body ages, and although this process is much slower for me than for you humans, I still age. I'm older than your great-grandmother, I just don't look my age. But it can still be fixed. For this, the body needs a paired, mirrored counterpart, a reflection." I had already resigned myself to its absence when suddenly I came across your ad searching for relatives. I simply couldn't believe my eyes when I saw you, girl. You're a copy of Veronica, my salvation. You'll become my double." The meaning of what was said barely reached Oksana. Listening to this long monologue, she stood petrified in front of the mirror, unable to move. Something was happening with her reflection in the mirror. Now she wasn't looking at herself but sideways, at someone next to her. And then her reflection started moving, as if obeying someone's commands, first timidly, slowly, and then faster, more confidently tilting, reaching out to touch the hair. In horror, Oksana noted these strange, inexplicable metamorphoses, and suddenly she felt her body responding to these movements. Vera Naumovna and Oksana stood before the mirror, their bodies moving in unison like a single well-oiled machine. The girl felt that her consciousness and inner self had betrayed her, ceased to obey her. Vera Naumovna smiled, and Oksana, like a puppet, repeated her movement, mimicking her reflection. She tried to resist but could only stop when Vera Naumovna looked away from the mirror and picked up a simple handheld mirror. With its help, tonight I will perform the ritual. This mirror is the key to the door, a guide to the mirrored world. It will open the passage there for you. You were lonely, weren't you? After the ritual, we will always be together. I will be on this side of the mirror, and you will return to youth and remain as you are now, Vera Naumovna exclaimed, her pale, wax-like face appearing masked like an unnaturally eerie. Do you believe in fate, destiny? There are only 2 days a year that allow crossing to the other side: Epiphany Eve and the ritual day that concludes Maslenitsa. I'm lucky you arrived on the eve of one of them. Besides, the elixir has already taken effect, and now you are fully prepared for the transition. So all those visions, hallucinations, were they because of those drops? What you saw was real. The elixir made you susceptible to what cannot be seen with ordinary eyes, and that means you are ready now, Vera Naumovna continued. And what will happen to me? Oksana managed to utter, feeling her throat dry up. Vera Naumovna laughed. My dear, I will take your place. I will be considered you. I will have your appearance. I will live your life, gradually changing it to my liking. I have eternal life and eternal youth ahead of me, and my reflection. Unfortunately, the ritual is one-sided. Your reflection will disappear, just like Vera's soul. I will ascend upstairs and you wait for me here, darling, don't miss me. Waving her hand, Vera Naumovna left the room, closed the door behind her, and locked it. Oksana didn't even try to stop her hostess. She felt powerless to resist, as if she had been enchanted by the mirror, suppressing her will and inducing apathy and submission. Or perhaps it was the continued effect of those drops. Reason and common sense screamed that the situation she found herself in was absurd and unnatural, that such a thing simply couldn't be. But contrary to all logic, everything was indeed happening. Her complete submission to Vera Naumovna and the mirror was real. The impossibility of resisting the inevitable was real. In the corner of the room stood a mirror, and in the semi-darkness, its surface gleamed with silver, and the bottomless, mercury-like depth drew the gaze. Was all this really happening? And in the evening she would have to step into it to stay forever in another reality. Desperation and hopelessness squeezed her chest. All that was left was to wait for something incomprehensible, terrible, something that would change her life forever. Oksana found the useless phone in her pocket. Along with it lay a matchbox and an old doll, her talisman. She sat on the floor, clutching the battered figurine in her hand, and cried. She remembered her peaceful and happy life with her grandmother, their symbolic rituals. The irony of fate: today was their day. Winter is not forever. Evil is not forever. The doll will burn to let the human live. From charms, the power of fire will protect. You are his guardian for me. Oksana repeated these words aloud again and again like a mantra. In the rhythmic and melodious sound of them, there was a strange power, as if they awakened the girl, freeing her from the spell and determining all her subsequent actions. Repeating the words of the spell, Oksana approached the table, gathered all the scraps scattered on its surface, piled them into a large heap, placed the fabric with the figurine on top, and struck a match. A weak flame flared up and went out. Another match, another. There were very few left. Her hands shook, the box overturned, matches scattered on the floor. Feverishly feeling the floor, Oksana found one match, tried to light it again. Finally, she succeeded. The doll ignited with a timid, weak flame. Then the fire flickered more cheerfully, and soon the entire small figurine was enveloped in a steady crimson flame. Enchanted by its light, Oksana almost screamed, and with each of her words the flame became brighter and stronger. The fire ran across the table, licked the head of the blank, and melting the wax like butter, slid further. Suddenly the flame reached the mirror left on the table by Vera Naumovna. The mirror burst into sparks, emitting a sound resembling a desperate human scream, and shattered, spreading a viscous puddle of molten glass. The flames approached the figure sitting in the chair. Smoky heat filled the workshop. The suffocating smell of burning additives scorched the lungs. There wasn't enough air. Oksana, trying to breathe through her sweater, pressed herself against the wall, away from the table. Her mind was clouded. Vera Naumovna burst into the room, shouting something. Swiping the shawl off her shoulders, she tried to extinguish the raging fire. "I'm almost losing consciousness," she groaned, and sliding out through the open door, slammed it shut, without hesitation, turning the key. A murky haze hung in the corridor. Through it, the doll standing at the stairs glowed faintly. Vera held it close with both hands, while the cats writhed, trying to break free. Or maybe it just seemed that way because of the trembling, melting air. Screams came from the workshop. Vera Naumovna rushed outside, banging on the door, but Oksana paid no attention to it. She forced herself to move forward, feeling along the wall, trying not to look at the doll, only controlling possible movements from her peripheral vision. But when she reached it, Oksana couldn't resist and involuntarily looked at it. Vera's facial expression had changed slightly. She was smiling now. Ascending the step proved difficult. With her last strength, Oksana lunged forward, grabbed her coat from the hanger, and stumbled out of the house into the fresh, frosty air. Screams, howls, and the steady roar of flames followed her, but she walked away without looking back even once.